Hey everyone, how's it going? So, today we're going to be doing a challenge that I've always thought was just too difficult to even attempt. I mean, beating a game with just Magikarp is not an easy thing to do. Magikarp is one of the weakest Pokemon of all time. In Generation 1, it's actually the 5th weakest, and it has a very shallow move pool, to put it mildly. But because I've been away for so long, I've decided it would be fun for you, not for me, this was torture, to try and beat the entirety of Red and Blue with just a Magikarp. And realistically, we only have 2 rules to this challenge. The first rule is that we aren't allowed to use anything in battle that isn't a Magikarp. We're going to need other Pokemon for HMs, but in battle, if Magikarp is to faint, battle over, just let the other Pokemon faint. No swapping to get rid of confusion, nothing like that. Magikarp in battle only. The only other rule is that we are not allowed to use any glitches. I made another video series where I use glitches, but people may already know that you can actually beat the entire game without ever leaving your house with glitches. So glitches just make this challenge way too easy. We're not going to be using them. With that said, let's get right into this challenge because there's a lot to talk about. One last thing before we do is that I did use a GameShark to set this whole scenario up. I considered all my options, and in the end, the only thing that really made sense was just to use GameShark to have the game generate a Magikarp as a starting Pokemon. But to make things a little more tricky, I made the game think that I picked Squirtle so that my rival would pick Bulbasaur. But yeah, that's been enough introduction. Let's get right to the run. Right now, we have the first battle with Gary, and it's a really easy battle for us because we can't win it. Magikarp, until level 15, has no attacking moves, it just has Splash, which literally does nothing, and it has 40 PP of Splash, so all we need to do is keep hitting Splash, and hope Bulbasaur uses Tackle pretty quick, and that's it. We lose the battle. Thankfully, it's one of the few battles in the game you're allowed to lose and still continue. That's pretty good, because otherwise the run would be over right here. We then play through the next part of the game pretty normally. I mean, we run away from every encounter because we don't have an attacking move, but we get Oak's Parcel, make our way back to Pallet Town, get the Pokedex, and here's where the run really begins. So obviously, we need to start attacking things because we need to gain experience point to level up, to finally get an attack at level 15, which would be Tackle, one of the worst attacks, but we need to get to that point. And in other games, that would be pretty tricky, because we don't have an attacking move, and the only way to get an attacking move is to use up all of your move's power points, in this case Splash, which has 40 power points, and then we can start using a move called Struggle. But if you just try and use Splash against things like PIDGEY, they're just going to attack you, and eventually you're going to faint. Thankfully, in Red and Blue, we are right next to Viridian Forest. You don't have to fight any trainers to get to Viridian Forest, and there is a 35% chance of finding a Kakuna and/or Metapod. Now, unlike all the other Pokemon you can encounter up to this point, Metapod or Kakuna can't attack. They only know Harden. And they will just use Harden over and over again, which will raise their defense, but that's great for us because we can keep spamming Splash. And once we use Splash 40 times, we can then use Struggle, which is great because we have an attacking move, but is also kind of a problem. See, Struggle in Generation 1 is a 50 base power move, which is great. It's actually stronger than Tackle, which we're going to be using for most of the run. However, unlike Tackle, every time you deal damage via Struggle, half the damage you just dealt gets inflicted back to you as recoil damage. This results in a situation whereby you can KO Kakuna or Metapod kind of easily, however, you still take back a ton of damage via recoil, and you're going to need to heal. But healing is pretty annoying because when you go to a Pokemon Center, which is the most common and free way of healing, all your power points get restored, meaning you'd have to find another Kakuna, use Splash 40 times, run away because Kakuna have more health than you do, so the recoil damage will actually make you faint before they faint, find a second Kakuna, and then take it out with Struggle, rinse and repeat. So, you must be wondering, isn't there a better way? And the answer is yes and no. There are potions, and potions are great. But good luck getting your hands on many of them because, and I didn't know this until I tried this challenge, they do not sell potions at the Viridian City Pokemart. Therefore, you would only have a maximum of 4 potions up to this point. The first being the one you get in the PC right when you start the game, the second from the NPC on the way to Viridian City, the third from the cuttable tree on the way to Viridian Forest, and the fourth right in front of the trainer that you would have to fight to get to Pewter City. And speaking of Pewter City, they do sell potions there, but to get to Pewter City, you have to get by that bug catcher and his level 9 Weedle, which for most runs wouldn't be a problem, but when using an underleveled Magikarp, that Weedle is pretty darn strong, and you're gonna have to level up a little bit. Now, one thing I feel I should mention at this point, since we're going to be needing to level up, is that Magikarp levels up the slowest out of any Pokemon in Generation 1, or at least as part of the slowest group. Now, in another video I can talk about how these groups work, but just know it takes Magikarp far more experience points to get from level 5 to 6 than it would something like Squirtle or Bulbasaur. It takes actually 3 Kakuna, giving about 50 experience points per KO, to get Magikarp up to level 6, and even more to get it up to level 7. So you're going to be having to do that process, find Kakuna, using Splash, KOing the next Kakuna, a whole bunch. But thankfully, in my case, it only took just over half an hour. Just. But once you're at around level 7, and if you have some potions left, you can take on that bug catcher and his Weedle, because truth be told, Weedle just does have Poison Sting, and its stats are about as bad as yours. In fact, they're a little worse. If you defeat the Weedle, hopefully you're not poisoned. I was in my case, but thankfully I had just enough HP remaining that I could make it to the Pokemon Center, and then I could buy 10 potions with the money I have. And don't expect to buy any more because money at this part of the game is really, really tight. I mean, if you beat all the trainers you can, you might be able to get 1 or 2 more potions. But if you were ever to faint, and if you didn't save, you lose half your money. But at this point, there's actually very little we can do. We can't go through to Mount Moon. I mean, not only would the trainers demolish us, but we have to defeat Brock. And Brock is a level 12 Geodude and a level 14 Onix. Our level 7 or 8 Magikarp isn't going to be doing squat to that. We're going to need to be at least level 15 and have an attacking move that doesn't do damage to us before we have any chance of getting to Brock. And you know what that means? That means be prepared to spend a whole bunch of time in Viridian Forest. A lot of time. We're talking hours here. And while you might be tempted to use potions to speed up the process, thereby not having to go back to the Pokemon Center and healing, finding another Kakuna using Splash 40 times, etc., be aware that Brock is really difficult. Struggle is classified as a normal type move, as is Tackle, and they are both not very effective against Brock's rock Pokemon that have sky-high defenses. You're going to need some potions to defeat Brock, roughly 5 or 6, maybe even 7. So while you could have 14 potions at this point, be aware that you might want to conserve some of them. However, you can use others, which does speed up the process a bit. It's still going to be taking a very long time. But once you get to about level 11 or 12, depending on your speed, you actually can do something to make it go by a little bit quicker. Now be aware, naturally as you level up, you're going to be doing more damage and taking back a little less recoil, because every time you do just 1 damage, it still does 1 damage back to you. And so you're going to start being able to KO 2 or even 3 Kakuna without needing to heal, which speeds up the process. But a way that speeds it up even more is that once you get Struggle, instead of finding another Kakuna, go to the Pewter City Gym and battle the junior trainer there. You're not going to be able to defeat him without using potions, but don't worry, the goal isn't to actually win. The goal is to just defeat his Diglett, because the Diglett has really bad HP and gives you 190 experience points every time you KO it. And thankfully, I found that once you outspeed the Diglett, you should KO it every time pretty reliably. Unfortunately, you're going to have next to no HP for the Sandshrew, but don't worry about it. We don't actually want to win, because if we were to win, then we wouldn't be able to do this again. and again, and again. So instead of fighting Kakuna, which give you about 50 experience points each time, and have an only 35% chance of appearing, we get to fight this Diglett reliably over and over again, until eventually you get to level 15, and at this point, it both speeds up and slows down, because we no longer have to go into Viridian Forest to run out of splashes because we have Tackle, a normal attacking move. The problem is, you're actually going to have a ton of HP remaining once you beat the Diglett, but the Sandshrew is still going to be quite a bit of a problem. It has pretty high defense and likes to use Sand Attack, and you're not going to be hitting many tackles once it uses Sand Attack 2 or 3 times. The result of this, in my experience, is that you're going to lose to the Sandshrew. It's just going to take much longer. It still saves time on average from using Splash 40 times, but unfortunately, you don't save as much time as you would hope once you get Tackle. What you will do eventually once you start leveling up is you will KO the Sandshrew. Once you do that, you can mop up in Viridian Forest, and hey, you can even fight Gary back in Viridian City. Once you're at level 15, 16, whatever, the fight with Gary is kind of a joke, unless Pidgey uses Sand Attack a few times, in which case Gary can win, especially with a Bulbasaur using Leech Seed. But eventually, and after not too many attempts, you will be victorious, and you might think, might as well go try Brock. Sure, go right ahead, it's not going to go very well. In fact, I've been playing RPGs for most of my life, and I'm extremely confident in saying that the gym battle with Brock while using Magikarp would rank up there as one of the most difficult RPG battles I've ever had. I mean it. Why? Well, let's take a look. As I mentioned earlier, Brock uses 2 Pokemon, a level 12 Geodude and a level 14 Onix. The Geodude only knows 2 moves, Tackle and Defense Curl. Tackle will usually do about 5 damage. You can defeat Geodude just by using Tackle and hope that half the time it's going to spam Defense Curl, which it seems to do. In fact, sometimes you can get really lucky and it can spam Defense Curl about 70% of the time. The only thing is, every tackle is only going to be doing about 1 damage to Geodude, and it takes roughly 29 to 30 tackles before the Geodude is going to faint. This means we're not going to have enough tackles to defeat the Onix. So, before you fight Brock, make sure to use up all your splashes because we're going to go back to using Struggle. And in later generations, when Struggle is classified as a typeless move, this would be amazing and the fight would be super fun and easy. But since Struggle is a normal move in Generation 1, the 15 extra base power does diddly squat because Onix has really high defense. Plus, of course, we get that recoil damage, and that's not why the Onix part is super difficult. No, that's because of Onix's moveset. Tackle is pretty much the same thing as Geodude, and Bide is actually kind of useful for us. But Screech is what makes the battle nearly impossible. Each time Onix uses Screech, your defense goes down, first time being halved, then it'll do 3 times the amount of damage, and then with 3 Screeches hitting, it'll deal 4 times the amount of damage. Thankfully, the way accuracy works in Generation 1 is a little weird, and status moves don't hit as much as they're supposed to. Unfortunately, if it uses Screech enough, eventually they'll start to land, and all Onix will need are 1 or 2 tackles until you faint. Even if it doesn't use Screech, the battle is still really difficult. With it using Tackle and with using Struggle, you're going to start to hemorrhage HP, and this is where the potions come in handy. While you might just need 1 or 0 for Geodude, you're going to need a whole bunch for Onix, especially if it uses a Screech. In fact, my battle with Onix that was successful was so lucky, I mean, I have to show it to you. You won't believe it. Alright, so I'm just going to open the folder. Here is the video file of the battle. Let me just double click on it. What? 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 So yes, obviously I'm reenacting my reaction to this, but my video in fact did corrupt, and even though I was able to recover the corrupted video, which is what you've actually been watching for the past few minutes, the battle with Onix, sadly, my software had actually crashed before that occurred, and I just wasn't aware. And of course I saved afterwards because I was so happy I finally beat the Onix, and that left me in a pretty difficult situation. Do I just tell you what happened and trust that you'll believe me? Do I give up and try a different video? Or do I do the truly insane thing and do this a second time in order to get the footage I need? Cue the montage! Alright, I'm kidding about doing a montage bit, but seriously, that's exactly what I did, because I'd invested 5.5 hours into this challenge, and I wasn't going to let some faulty software stop me from making this video. So, I used Pokemon Blue, and I started from the beginning. But I did do one thing that kind of cut the time in half. What I did was, instead of using my Game Boy player to record the footage, I instead opted to use Pokemon Stadium 2's Game Boy Tower, which is essentially a software emulator, but if you beat certain parts of the game, you then unlock Doduo mode and Dodrio mode, which speeds up the game 2 times and 4 times respectively. Thus, I could play through the game at a much faster speed, which obviously saves me a ton of time. Some of you might be wondering, why didn't you just do this to start? And the answer, truthfully, is that I wanted the experience to be authentic, because the fact of the matter is, the amount of you that are actually going to try this is probably not that high. A lot of you are going to watch this video, and this is going to be the only real way you're going to be able to experience a glitchless Magikarp run. And thus, I want to be able to play through the game the way the majority of you would play through the game. Using Pokemon Stadium 2, I mean, truth be told, how many of you right now have a working N64, a copy of Pokemon Stadium 2, a controller, a transfer pack, and have beaten the game far enough to get Dodrio mode? Probably very few of you, and yes, I happen to have all those things, but most of you probably don't. And therefore, I want to play through the game at single speed. It also just doesn't feel right to me to play through the game. Even though it is an official Pokemon product, it still just doesn't feel, I don't know. It's my run, I want to play through it properly, and so I only used Doduo mode and Dodrio mode to get right back to the point where I was at. And this time I leveled up my Magikarp all the way to level 19, and I think that helped a little bit, even though Tackle was still doing 4 damage. I also decided to have 10 potions this time instead of 6, which also helped out a little bit. Anyway, getting to the battle, the Geodude part, the luck was kind of average. I got a few more crits than I did the time before, but Geodude also got a lot more damage on me. In fact, I needed 2 potions. It didn't really matter because I had so many extra this time, but that was a little below average luck. ONIX, on the other hand, I had insane luck. It used Screech a total of 6 times, the 6th on the last turn, and the first 5 times it failed. I don't know what the probability of that is, but I'm telling you, it's not very high. This was an incredibly lucky battle. I mean, it used Bide a ton. I just got a ton of critical hits. A really, really, really lucky battle. And considering how much I had to go through to get to this point, I spent over 11 hours between the 2 playthroughs, so I wasn't complaining. But yes, I defeated Brock, and at this point, the run starts going a little more smoothly. I mean, most of the other Pokemon aren't nearly as challenging as Brock's Geodude or ONIX, but still, you pretty much have to heal after every battle or so, because Magikarp's Tackle, even though you're kind of over-leveled, it just doesn't do enough damage, so you're still going to be taking back a ton of damage. Status moves are still pretty dangerous, so you can still lose any battle if you get a little bit of bad luck, and if you don't heal, you might not even have enough HP, so I wouldn't say the battles are necessarily easy. In Mount Moon, in fact, there are a couple of really difficult battles. I didn't even bother with the Hiker because I knew that would be absolutely brutal, and I had to go back to the entrance multiple times to heal, but the 2 battles I'm thinking of in particular are the battle with the Lass, who has the Oddish and Bellsprout. I was not able to defeat her. I was able to get past the Oddish one time, but it's just so difficult. Oddish is Absorb, it does a ton of damage to you, and then it heals the Oddish. It's just very hard to take out. You don't have a lot of health, and then the Bellsprout takes you out. It's just really difficult, so I didn't even bother. Thankfully, you can just go around her, and you can skip the Hiker, but then there was the Rocket right before the exit, who has the Raticate. I actually spent a solid 45 minutes. I realized I could just skip him, but I just couldn't defeat the RATICATE. It was just doing too much damage, and my Magikarp, as you can see, is fairly high level. Still, not too easy. RATICATE, to be fair, is the first fully evolved Pokemon I believe I've faced so far, and it was definitely a sign of things to come. Once you exit Mount Moon, things don't get any easier because the next battle is with Gary, who has a bunch of really strong Pokemon. And it's the first Pokemon that's probably one of the most difficult, the PIDGEOTTO. PIDGEOTTO has pretty good attack, pretty good defense, and has Sand Attack. And once it hits you with a Sand Attack, the battle is pretty much over. I mean, you can try and continue and hope you get a little lucky, but once you start missing attacks, even the Rattata can take you out. And good luck once getting to the Bulbasaur. I was at level 23, and I fought almost every trainer I could, and I've battled every wild Pokemon I could. I was not able to get past Gary until I did a little bit more grinding, got up to level 24, and used 2 rare candies. Once I was at level 26, it still took me a few tries and a bit of luck to defeat him, but even though he had a Bulbasaur, I was able to do it at level 26, and there really weren't too many other challenges to speak of in this section of the game. I mean, of course, there was the rematch with ONIX, but thankfully you don't actually have to do that. I wasn't able to get past the ONIX, mind you. I got pretty close, but you can just fight the other hiker with the MACHOP and the GEODUDE. It's far easier. And then, of course, if you want to get to Bill's house, which you're going to need to do to progress through the game, you're going to need to fight another trainer with an ODDISH. But I realized that I actually had a few more trainers I could defeat in the meantime, namely the trainers at Misty's gym, all of whom are extremely easy because they use water moves, which are all not very effective. So defeating the trainers in Misty's gym and Misty herself, unlike Brock, were really easy and gave me a ton of useful experience points. Now, this isn't to say I didn't have to use a couple potions on the Starmie. Starmie is still a very powerful Pokemon, and Magikarp is still pretty weak, and unlike Brock, which took me 20 plus attempts, I was able to do this on my first try. Of course, then we faced the real gym leader, the lass with the ODDISH, and even though I was now at level 29, she was still very difficult. And this was now my 5th or 6th try already. However, with the added money from Misty's gym, I was able to buy some potions and develop a strategy. See, what makes the Oddishes so difficult is the fact that they heal every time they attack you. So even when you use a potion, the Oddishes to absorbs pretty much give it almost as much health back as you got back. So it doesn't work. What you need to be able to do is to take out the Oddish without having to use a potion. Once you do that, the lass sends out a Pidgey, and this is what makes this battle doable. On the Pidgey, so long as it doesn't use Sand Attack, you can heal as much as you want. Take out the Pidgey, and then hope you have enough health to take out that second Oddish. This should work, but if you get critted or a Sand Attack, it won't. So once again, good luck is required, but at least there's a viable strategy. Now, one battle I have to talk about is the battle with the rocket who you get dig from, because this battle was absolutely insane. Now, I got past the rocket's Machop with 29 health, and out came the Drowsy, whose confusion did a lot more damage than I was expecting. It was doing, without critting, 14 damage per hit. Plus, then it used Hypnosis while I was healing, and I thought, okay, the battle is over. In Generation 1, you don't even get to attack the turn you wake up. So I figured, alright, this battle is done, and I hadn't saved in a long time, so I couldn't just reset. I didn't expect this battle to be so difficult. Thankfully, it starts using Pound for a couple of turns, I wake up, but then out comes another confusion, then some more Pounds, then another confusion, and I'm like, alright, I'm done. I have no more healing items. Even if it uses Pound here, I have 2 health, nothing I can do. It uses Disable, and disables Splash instead of Tackle, and with 2 health, I take out the Drowsy. That is about as lucky as I've ever gotten in Pokemon in my life. However, the next part of the game actually is a lot more mundane. There are a ton of trainers around Vermilion City. There are trainers on Route 6, there are trainers on Route 11, and of course there are trainers on the SS Anne, and none of them are too problematic. The biggest reason being that once you get to Vermilion City, you have access to super potions and the ability to heal during battle 50 HP versus just 20 from a regular potion. It really does make the game a lot easier. Remember, with the Oddishes, it's why we couldn't heal when the Oddish was using Absorb. So none of the battles were particularly noteworthy to talk about. That is, of course, until we get back to our rival, Ash or Gary, whatever you want to call him. He's still pretty difficult and took me quite a few tries, and I sort of glossed over the strategy the last time I faced him, and the strategy is pretty similar, so I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail right now. So basically, he starts off by using a PIDGEOTTO, and once again, you don't want to get hit by Sand Attack. Obviously, you should have already saved before. If Sand Attack is used, just reset. It isn't worth it. It will fail, I think, 25% of the time. Hope he doesn't use it. Then comes out the RATICATE, which is the evolved form, of course, of the Rattata he used earlier. It's a little more tricky because it does a bit more damage, but you're at a much higher level, so I think it evens out, especially with the super potions. Probably don't need to heal, but if you do, it's fine. Then comes out the Kadabra, which is probably the biggest difference of the battle, because Kadabra actually is dangerous, versus the Abra, which is, of course, a joke. Kadabra can use Confusion, which does some pretty decent damage, and of course it can use Disable, which works a little differently in Generation 1. In this generation, it will randomly take one of your moves and disable them, rather than disable just the last move you used. So that gives us a bit of leeway, but if Tackle is disabled, once again, simply reset, you just got bad luck. Now, aside from healing if you have to on the Kadabra, another thing that's very helpful for the IVYSAUR fight is to use the X special, which you can pick up in the underground tunnel. It's hidden there between routes 5 and 6. Using that will make the IVYSAUR portion a lot easier. And if you make it through with pretty decent health to IVYSAUR, as long as it doesn't get any crits, you don't get any misses, or something else crazy doesn't happen, you should beat the IVYSAUR in 1 or 2 tries. The more difficult thing is getting disabled or sand attack, but if those things don't happen, you should be fine, especially if you have super potions to spare. So, of course, I finally did get a run. It took me multiple attempts, I should mention. I think it took me about 10. But of course, you just keep trying, and eventually I got past him, which gives me access to HM1 Cut. Now, you might be thinking, okay, now's the point where you go fight Lieutenant Surge. That's going to be fun. But nope, we have no interest in facing Lieutenant Surge, at least right now. You see, Generation 1 is pretty unique to Pokemon games in that there's not a lot stopping you from going out of order. As long as you've beaten Misty, you have access to Cut, and once you have Cut, you can get past Cerulean City to Rock Tunnel, which is where we're going to be going next. And we will face Lieutenant Surge, but a lot later once we're at a much higher level and we have access to more items. Raichu with Thunderbolt would just be completely a mismatch, even at our high level right now. So we're on the way to Rock Tunnel, and honestly, there's not too many interesting things happening on the way. There is another Oddish trainer with 2 Bellsprouts as well, but with Super Potions and with the Bellsprouts in between the Oddishes, it's not too hard. I think it took me a couple tries, but it's a walk in the park compared to the previous Oddish trainer, aka the real gym leader of Cerulean City. There was a hiker I fought, but that was an accident. You can completely skip him, and he was annoying as all heck to fight. I mean, I had to use a couple Ether because I kept running out of Tackle. Of course, I could have just used Splash, but I didn't want to use up all of my potions, and truth be told, you really aren't going to need any Ether for the rest of the run, so this shouldn't happen. Of course, it was a mistake. I didn't save, so I couldn't just reset. It happens. Anyway, I want to skip ahead to what is by far the most difficult trainer in this entire run, and of course, it's a trainer with an Oddish. And I think I have an hour and a half of footage trying to beat this trainer. Honestly, a lot of parts of this run were really frustrating, but this one might be, in some ways, one of the most frustrating parts. The thing is with the Oddish trainer, of course, Absorb does a lot of damage and gives Oddish back some health, which is a problem. But moreover, this Oddish now has access to Sleep Powder, Stun Spore, and Poison Powder. If you get Sleep Powdered and it hits, it's done. You're going to be asleep for like 2 to 3 to 4 turns. I think it's actually 3 to 5 in Generation 1. Doesn't matter. The fact is, even when you wake up, you can't attack. The battle is over. There is no point continuing. Save before, obviously, and reset. Stun Spore, you'd think, is the best one because it doesn't do any damage. It just makes you a little slower. But, of course, there's that 25% chance you don't attack. And the fact that you're slower gives the Oddish an extra attack on you because it now outspeeds you. It also is not viable to continue this fight. I was never, ever able to get past even the Oddish. And there's a Bulbasaur to follow the Oddish when I was paralyzed. However, Poison, I was actually able to get past the Oddish once. but not with a lot of health. Using potions and getting a little bit of luck, I was able to get past the Oddish, but then the Bulbasaur completely demolished me. It used Leech Seed. I was not able to heal enough or do enough damage to take it out. It was very frustrating. In fact, I decided to go back onto Route 9 and get one more level, and it did really make a difference, being at now level 38 versus level 37. I tried this time being paralyzed and still it didn't work, but poison did. Of course, you might be wondering, why not just hope for a couple misses? I never got misses. I have no idea how accuracy works in Generation 1, but these are supposed to hit 75% of the time. You would think after like an hour and a half, you'd get a couple battles where Oddish just keeps using Sleep Powder and misses. That's what I was expecting, but nope. It always seemed to hit. It hit, in my estimation, about 85 to 95% of the time. It was basically hitting every single battle. Getting a miss was a nice treat, and I still wasn't able to get past the Oddish. In fact, the successful battle, I was poisoned. But thanks to the increase in HP and a bit better luck with critical hits, both on the Oddish and the Bulbasaur, I was able to get past her, and I can chalk it up nothing more than a little bit of grinding and dumb luck. And it sucks because I do like to be able to use some strategy, but there's really nothing else you can do other than hoping it either misses or for crits, because Oddish has just got your number. And then of course, what's your reward for beating this Oddish? Getting to fight a hiker with a level 25 Geodude. So I was prepared for a long and drawn out battle. But instead, I got one of the easiest battles in the entire run. Why? Geodude immediately used self-destruct and I survived. Now, I had just saved, so if I would have fainted, I would have just healed before. But man, I was really happy with this outcome because it meant that the next hiker I had to face, there was a chance of the same thing happening. And it did. So, battles with hikers no longer were these long, grueling, annoying affairs. They actually went pretty quickly, as you do have to fight another hiker, and even though he has a Graveler, I was able to survive its self-destruct and make it through Rock Tunnel with no problems overall. And that brings us to Lavender Town. Who can believe we made it all the way here? And once again, the run is really going to start to pick up. There are a whole bunch of trainers on Route 8, and of course there is the Rocket Game Corner where there are a bunch of trainers to fight there. But once we get to Celadon City, we are finally able to purchase an item I used in my glitched Magikarp run that made the whole thing much easier, and those are the battle items, aka the X items. Namely X Attack, giving our Magikarp a little bit more firepower, or even something like an X Special to raise our pitiful special defense, or an X Defense for that matter, and a Guard Spec to protect against those annoying sand attacks, tail whips, what have you. But the truth is, I really didn't need them for the trainers I'd be facing on Route 8, I also faced the trainers on Route 12, and of course in the Rocket Hideout. And I mean, of course you have to heal a lot, which is annoying, so you have to go back and forth, but I really didn't have too difficult a time because I was starting to gain a ton of experience points. Like Magikarp was already in the 40s, while most of the Pokemon I were fighting were in the early 20s. So the battles were going pretty well. Of course, that is until we get to Giovanni. Now, on paper, Giovanni looks like he'd be a nightmare. An Onix, a Rhyhorn, and then that Kangaskhan. I mean, how am I going to beat him, right? Well, thanks to the battle items, actually pretty easily. All you need to do is use a Guard Spec to prevent Onix from using Screech. Eventually, it will start to use Rage, which really isn't a good attack for the opponent to use. Rage in Generation 1 is really strange. You can only keep using Rage for the rest of the battle, and every time you attack, Rage's power will increase. However, we can keep using X attacks to raise our attack, so by the time we finally decide to attack the Onix, it's a little too late and Rage isn't going to do enough damage. Plus, if we really wanted to, we can use some X Defense, but with all those X attacks, even the Rhyhorn, and especially the Kangaskhan, are no match for our mighty Magikarp. And Giovanni looked like he'd be one of the hardest trainers in the game, but thanks to the X items, you can really see how much easier the game gets, at least for now. Speaking of which, I think it's time we face Lieutenant Surge, and he's kind of a joke. You see, the Voltorb does know Sonic Boom, so it can do some pretty decent damage. However, it's not going to be doing all that much. So we can go and raise our attack quite substantially with some X attacks. We can heal ourselves and then sweep through his entire team, Lieutenant Surge, again, looked like he'd be a real problem, but because we waited and we didn't have to fight him right away, the battle was actually a complete joke. And continuing on this topic of battles you'd think would be hard but aren't, let's go fight our rival in the Pokemon Tower. So I headed back to Lavender Town and ready to face the rival, but this time with a pretty solid strategy. Started off with a guard spec, so I don't have to worry about Pidgeotto using Sand Attack anymore, and then I used 2x attacks. I wanted to see if that was enough. Wasn't doing quite enough damage, so I decided to use a third, and the Pidgeotto was taken out. Then the Gyarados came out, and I used Tackle. I didn't quite do half, so I decided to use a 4th X attack, and my second Tackle still didn't take it out. With a Dragon Rage, I actually lost a lot of my health, but rather than heal, I just used another Tackle. Neither the Growlithe nor the Kadabra stood any chance against my Magikarp now. Both of them fainted in one hit. I wasn't sure if I would take out the Ivysaur in one hit, and I didn't. It survived with just under half health, and it used a Vine Whip, which still did a really decent chunk of damage, but thankfully I knew I would take it out with the next tackle, and the battle was done. Once again, I think this clearly shows just how useful the battle items are in this run. I wish we had access to them earlier. It really would have made this run a lot less frustrating. However, speaking of frustrating, we are about to run into a wall. You see, we're kind of trapped right here. I haven't defeated Erica yet, but the rest of the game is blocked off by 2 Snorlaxes. One on the way to Cycling Path, and one on Route 12, and in order to wake up those Snorlaxes, we need the Pokeflute. Unfortunately, to get the Pokeflute, we need to get to the top of the tower, and there is an obstacle that is unfortunately unpassable, and that is this channeler. You see, there is no way to get up Lavender Tower without fighting a channeler, and the channelers use ghost Pokemon. Unfortunately, Magikarp has still 2 attacks. Tackle, a normal move, which doesn't affect ghost Pokemon, and Splash, which does nothing. We can even whittle our Splash PP and our Tackle PP all the way down to 0 and start using Struggle. In Generation 1 only, like I said earlier, Struggle is a normal move. So, you might be thinking, well, I'm sure you must have thought of something. I mean, clearly there must be a way to progress through the rest of the game, right? Unfortunately, the answer is actually no. And trust me, I thought of everything. At one point, what I was going to do is buy enough healing items to wait until the Ghastlies ran out of PP, and they would start using Struggle, and the recoil damage would end up making them faint. Unfortunately, as I mentioned early in the video, in Generation 1, the game doesn't keep track of the opponent's PP, meaning they will never run out of Nightshade's licks, etc., and thus we have no way to do damage to the Ghastly whatsoever. It is insanely frustrating because I do want to continue this run, but without using glitches, there's no way to do it, and the point of this was to be a glitchless run. The answer to the question, can you beat Red and Blue with just a Magikarp, unfortunately, is no. Even if we got past this part, there is of course Agatha later on in the game where we'd have to deal with the exact same thing, but we can't even get to most of the gyms. We can't get to Fuchsia City because it's blocked off by Snorlaxes. We can't even access the Saffron City gym because there's a member of Team Rocket who blocks the way, and while he will move, in order to get him to do so, you need to beat Giovanni in the Sylph Company building. Unfortunately for us, there is another member of Team Rocket that blocks the entrance to that building, and he will only move once you rescue Mr. Fuji. We can't get to Cinnabar Gym because we don't get Surf, which is located in the Safari Zone in Fuchsia City, and of course Giovanni won't appear until you defeat him in the Sylph Company. So, what does that leave us to do? Only 2 things. We can defeat the Fighting Dojo, and of course, defeat Erica, who is going to be a pain. The Fighting Dojo is relatively easy. With a combination of X items and healing, you can defeat most of the Pokemon even though you're supposed to fight them much later in the game. Our Magikarp's at a pretty high level, and sure, it's not as easy as most of the other battles, but the truth of the matter is, you can use enough X attacks to make both Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee, even though they're pretty powerful Pokemon at this point of the game, be not too much of a problem. So, I know it's a letdown that there's not much more of the game left, but trust me, the ending was truly something special. because I had no idea how impossibly difficult Erica would be. I mean, I thought Erica would be difficult, but I had a strategy. I mean, the grass trainers in her gym aren't that easy, even though we're at a much higher level, but Erica herself was an absolute nightmare. Remember how I said that Brock was one of the hardest RPG battles I've ever faced? Well, Erica is even harder, and the only way to defeat her is literally to get as lucky as you possibly can. Why? Generation 1 has really weird mechanics. You see, Erica leads off with a Victreebel, and Victreebel has Razor Leaf, and Razor Leaf has a higher than normal critical hit ratio. And in Generation 1, critical hit ratios are really strange and are calculated based on the Pokemon's base speed. With Victreebel's base speed, Razor Leaf will crit 99.6% of the time. Essentially, it will crit every single hit, and this is a huge problem. Not only does it do massive damage, I can barely survive a single Razor Leaf, but critical hits in Generation 1 and beyond ignore all your buffs, so I can keep using X specials till the cows come home. I am not going to be getting any additional defense to protect me from Razor Leaf. Additionally, Victreebel has Sleep Powder, and we've already talked about how devastating sleep can be. Add all this up, and this fight is brutal, just completely brutal. You basically need to get 4 or maybe even 5 hits if you don't crit against Victreebel to take it out, and it only needs to hit a single Sleep Powder and 2 Razor Leafs. The math doesn't work in your favor. Basically, you're praying for a conjunction of a Razor Leaf miss, a Sleep Powder miss, and some crits from your tackle. You need a bunch of those to happen in the same fight, which is pretty unlikely, which is why it took me over 2 hours just to get past the Victreebel. Eventually, I got some lucky misses, a crit with tackle at the right time, and I was able to get past the Victreebel. Once I did, the rest of the battle is actually a joke. Tangela only has Bind and Constrict, so you can basically use all your X attacks. If you're really scared, you can use some X specials, and you're good to go against Vileplume. Vileplume's Petal Dance would be even scarier, but thankfully, with all those X attacks, Vileplume is a complete joke. And so really, the final boss of this run was Victreebel, and I cannot overstate just how frustrating it was to finally take out the Victreebel. I mean, there really was no good strategy to use. I couldn't use X specials, I didn't have enough time to set up X attacks, I couldn't really level up that much more. I mean, yeah, I could just find wild Pokemon, but realistically, I need to be at like level 60 or something, so it would take 3 Razor Leafs instead of 2, probably even higher, so that just didn't make any sense. I just had to keep trying it over and over again and hope I got lucky, and eventually I did. And trust me, I wish I had a live reaction because I was pumped. And that's a fitting way to end this run. I mean, yeah, it's unfortunate we can't go any further, but after defeating that Victreebel, I still felt pretty darn good. And that's about the end of this video. I mean, some final comments. Obviously, this run is just meant to be in good fun. I mean, yes, there was strategy, and I don't want to make it seem like I was just getting lucky all the time, but luck obviously played a huge part. We have a single Pokemon, we are pretty much just using a single move. A lot of the time, there was only so much strategy I could use, so I'm not trying to make it like I'm some sort of Pokemon champion. The only thing I'd be a champion of is making these ridiculous challenges and actually following through, and I don't think that's a positive characteristic for myself. I guess the last thing I'm gonna say is that if you guys get this video to, I don't know, something crazy like 20,000 likes, there is another game out there where you can get through the entirety of Kanto with a Magikarp, but I don't really think I'm interested in doing that right now. In fact, I'm much happier going back to videos where I catch Pokemon as opposed to trying to be the very best. So thank you for following along on this odyssey, and I hope to speak to you guys again very soon. I don't plan on taking another long hiatus, and I do plan to be finishing some series that I have neglected for far too long. So thank you guys for watching. Take care.